Thanks, Lukas.
I'm trying to get the title for a while now, but they keep telling me CEO is taken. Then I asked for CXO, and that also wasn't allowed. Hi, so I'm Lukas. I work for Booking.com. We have over 100 teams that run experiments. That's how we can run 1,000 concurrent. That's how you scale. You get more people to do it. You also get it by putting analytics in the tool and education in the tool. We talked about that before. This talk, I had a talk prepped and then I got here this afternoon and then Colin turned it down. So now I have a new talk. I'm not kidding, like this is real. This talk is called A Boat Filled with Sauerkraut. If you thought the last talk was fluffy and about culture, then this is more so. I want to talk a little bit about the value of data and using data to make decisions. Experimentation is a great way, as Ben said, to get data about causality, but there are other ways you can create data and other data you could create. So first things, let's talk about things I created. I am so into experimentation that I got twins. I called them A and B for a very long time, just to tease my wife. And then we went to the hospital for an echoscopy. And actually in the hospital, they also call the babies A and B before they're born. And so this doctor is going like, oh, it looks like B is a little bit smaller. And she'd go, what did you say? So they're not actually called A and B. But. So chapter 1, sauerkraut. So in 1768, a boat sailed out of Plymouth. And this boat had two missions. One was public, for the public good of science, and one was a very secret mission. And if you had the manifest of stuff that was on board of this ship, if you had all the data and you tried to make sense of what this boat was doing, you would find one very obvious outlier, namely that this ship was carrying 3 tons of sauerkraut. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that is a lot of sauerkraut. So I want to challenge the idea that more data is always better. So I just gave you some data, and you have no idea what to do with it. That's going to remain that way until someone remembers to ask me at the Q&A. And so there's this pervasive idea that in the world of big data, that you get all this data together in one place, and then you hire someone called a data scientist, and then he rummages through the data and somehow finds gold. And I want to show you that this doesn't make any sense. And I'll use a few examples from ancient history. So, Thomas Kuhn, very smart man, said that scientific progress is not a single, simple line going to the truth. And I tell this to people and they say, yeah, I get that. It's more like a wobble that goes forward, right? That's what people think. That's not what it is at all. Like, science goes backwards. Science makes mistakes. And the same will happen if you run experiments or if you use data in your organization, more so if you don't use data in your organization, but even if you use data in your organization, you will make mistakes. And a good example of this is this guy, Aristarchus. In the 3rd century before Christ, he had this novel idea. He said, the gods built a temple, that is our solar system. And if you build a temple, you put the light in the center, because then it can shine on all things. Now this is a lousy argument by any standard. It was pretty good for the Greeks. I mean, they made arguments like this. But there's no data here, there's no evidence. But still, he is the guy who invented the idea of heliocentricity. He invented the idea that the Earth is revolving around the sun. And he's credited with this idea, even though it was a very weak argument, right? So, 200 years later, comes along this guy, Ptolemy. Ptolemy is a very smart man, and he has 2 competing ideas. One is heliocentricity, that is, the sun is at the center of the solar system and the Earth revolves around it, and the other is geocentricity. The Earth is at the center and the sun and all the planets revolve around that. Now we have 2 competing models that can both explain the movements of the stars and the planets, and he says, you know, maybe it has escaped these people's notion, right? Maybe these heliocentric guys forgot to think about that if the Earth is indeed spinning around the sun, then for this model to work, the Earth must also be revolving at 1 revolution per day. Now, they had an approximate idea of how big the Earth was, and so he calculated the speed at which the ground must be moving. And he said, look, if the Earth is indeed moving that fast, and I'm telling you it isn't, then if I throw something up in the air, the Earth is moving so fast that it should be dropping to the west. Right? So he goes, look, this can't ever work. Also, if I look up at the stars, and if the Earth was moving through the solar system, then the stars should be moving parallel to each other. I should be observing a parallax as the stars move. Our Starkist, of course, said, well, the stars are very, very, very far away. To which people said, no, nothing's that big. And so Ptolemy wasn't a stupid man, he was a very smart man, and he actually had two very good arguments against heliocentricity. He said, look, there's no westward motion. I throw things up in the air, they come right back down. So the Earth is not revolving by one revolution a day. Also, I don't see the stars move. There's no stellar parallax. So again, there's no evidence here that the Earth is moving through the solar system. And this is crucial, I have math that allows me to predict very accurately where stellar bodies are going to be. So he had a mathematical framework that allowed him to say the moon is going to come up here, the sun is going to set there. And so he concluded that geocentricity was the right model. But what he actually meant, of course, because he's using absence of evidence is not evidence from absence, or the other way around, he said, we did not observe any westward motion. We did not observe any stellar parallax, and the geocentric math works to explain what we observe. Now, here's the cool thing. This westward motion, it actually exists. It's called the Coriolis effect. It's why, if you shoot a cannonball far enough, you'll have to adjust your aim to correct for it. And this stellar parallax also exists, but you need a very good telescope to be able to see it. So he has a very good argument. What he does not have is the data to make it. Along comes this guy. And he says, this is, what, 1600 years later? He goes, hey guys, I read this really old book. And there's this great idea in here that actually it's the sun at the center of things, not the Earth, right? And actually, when he wrote this in his draft, and later when he actually published his work, he forgot to, mention that someone else had this idea before. So that's why Nicholas Copernicus is often credited with this idea that the sun is at the center of the universe, solar system. And so he drew this model and he said, look, the sun is at the center and everything revolves around. Yeah, there's this thing about the moon that revolves around the Earth, but that's kind of weird. And people said, well, why is the moon the only moon? Like, why don't all of the other planets have any moons? Why do we need this additional math to make this work? Your model is kind of convoluted. And when he published this, then they were so afraid that the church was going to be really upset about this, that they actually wrote this really nice preface where they said, look, these hypotheses need not be true nor even probable. On the contrary, if they provide calculus that is consistent with the observation, that's enough. Like, I'm writing down all these things as if they were true, but they don't have to be true. It's fine if we can use the math to predict things. Again, 100 years later, along comes this guy. And finally, someone learns to build telescopes. Galileo Galilei wasn't the first guy to come up with the idea of heliocentricity. That was almost 2,000 years old by then. But he built his own telescopes. He built his own machines that allowed him to see further than anyone else. And what he saw was that Jupiter also had moons. And this is when finally people started saying, wait a minute, now the geocentric math, where Earth is at the center of things, doesn't work anymore. Now finally we have a piece of data that allows us to say, maybe this heliocentric model isn't so crazy after all. And this is what led to the acceptance of the heliocentric model that we all know is true now. Right? The key thing here is that there's multiple models that can explain the data you have. So if you have some data and you look at it, there's probably different ways you can explain the world that created those data points. And if you want to figure out which one of them is true, which one is the right model, you probably need to collect some very specific data. And this is what Ben was also talking about when he talked about finding causality. If you have a lot of data, you'll find correlations, right? But those correlations don't tell you necessarily how the world works. They give you an idea of what might be true. Then you use an experiment to figure out which one. You use the experiment as a way to create data, in a sense. What I'm trying to get at is this idea. There's some data you have, and there's some data you need. In any case, that wasn't abundantly clear. That's the sauerkraut, that's the science. Right? Science is mostly about figuring out what data you need, not what data you have. So this notion of having data science of this guy goes at the data I have, that's not the data scientist you're looking for. So let me zoom out a little more. What Aristarchus also did was try and estimate the size of the sun and the Earth, and the distance between them. And to do this, he used the moment that half moon happened. So when there's a half moon, what do you call it in English? It's called half moon. It's called half moon. Yes, same thing. Okay. The lunar eclipse. So when the Earth is between the moon and the sun, so that there's no more moon. And the solar eclipse, when the moon is between the sun and the Earth, so that there's no more sun. And he used these different things to draw very simple geometrical models that you could probably do yourself if you studied math in middle school. And he tried to estimate the size of or the distance between Earth and the sun. And he did very well, actually. So this is about between 2 and 1 orders of magnitude off. So it's not that far away. And the reason we have this uncertainty about how far away he actually thought the sun was is because he used a unit called the stadi, which, depending on inflection, means different things. Very useful. And we don't know which inflection he meant when he wrote it down, because it was transcribed so many times that we don't know what he meant. So he either meant 380 or 1520. It's not that he gave a range. He meant one of these two. So again, almost 2,000 years later, along comes this guy, Halley. You might have heard of him. He has a comet named after him, Halley's Comet. And he said, we can use the same geometry that Aristarchus used, but with Venus, because Venus is very small compared to the sun. And when Venus moves past the sun, if you measure this moment that it starts passing and the moment that it moves away from the sun, you measure this from different places on the planet. You can calculate the parallax of Venus moving across the sun, and this allows you to estimate how far away it is. Again, using simple geometry. All we would need is a measurement of when the Venus started moving across the sun, somewhere, here in the UK, and somewhere, I don't know, Haiti. So that's why this guy why this boat full of sauerkraut leaves. Captain Cook, this is the name of the captain of the ship, sails all the way to Tahiti from Plymouth just to collect 2 timestamps. Because he wants to know, when does Venus start crossing the sun and when does Venus stop crossing the sun. That's it. That's why he's going. This is science. It's not about how much data you have. It's about thinking, what data point do I need to prove the thing I want to prove, to figure out how large the solar system is, etc. And so, of course, he gets there on time. Yes. It only happens twice every 200 years, actually. But he would have to wait another 180 years, I think, if he missed it. So he was on time. The weather was awesome. So yes. And then he measured. He sets up his telescope. Actually, 3 people set up their telescope on Tahiti to measure it, and this happens. It's a bit difficult to see, but as Venus moves towards the perimeter of the sun, there's what's called a black drop effect. It's a sort of mirage effect that occurs when a very small black dot hits the side of the sun. And this made it difficult for them to say exactly when Venus crossed the perimeter of the sun. And this led to far more error in their measurements than they hoped to get. Even within the 3 people on Tahiti, they had more error than they expected. So, right place, right time, right idea, insufficiently accurate telescope. They sailed all the way around the world to figure out that they couldn't actually measure what they wanted to measure. But 4 years later, Lalande still tried to use this data to then calculate how far the sun was, and he was about 2% off, so he wasn't actually that bad. And the real number is like 23,500 or something. So here's the key point. Science is limited by data, and data is limited by engineering. So if you think of yourself as I'm only a developer, I only write logs, I only put data in a database, this is a key part of doing good science. The quality of those data points collected determines the quality of the science performed, right? And you need both. You need good models and good data. Elon Musk put this very nicely. Elon Musk, the Tesla guy, he actually, I think he did a master's or a PhD for like a week, and they said, screw this. Because what he figured out is that this limitation is a very hard ceiling. And so with the data you have, you can do a given amount of science. But if you want to do better, then you have to actually become an engineer. So the best data scientists figure this out, and they think in the world, they think about the world, remember this model, data you have, data you need, they think of the world in these terms. The data you need and the data you have is vastly outnumbered by the data you could create. All the data points that are theoretically possible to create, right? And this creates a whole new way of thinking about data science, because to me, experiments are just another way to create data. It's a very good way to create data about causality. But just like, now a little bit of a rant. So this really tickles my nerves, people saying things like this. Like this, they will think of it as a chess problem, right? A very constrained problem. But data science or machine learning in the real world is not like that at all. There are no rules. You can break the boundaries. And so Booking.com solves this like this. We have two boxes. What did you like? What did you not like? Problem solved. Done. Now get back to work. And I know you're laughing because you think like, well, that's easy. Yes, exactly, right? If you try to solve this from the data you have, it's a very difficult problem. Sentiment analysis is actually very tricky. I wouldn't even try my hand at it. It's very difficult to do, especially on things like Twitter, where people use 140 characters to say things like lol, or what's that thing? I built this thing. Said no one ever. Like, I love having the flu, said no one ever. So I built this thing that actually finds people who said that. That's what I do on Saturdays. So this solution is almost too simple, right? Because it's thinking about what data do I actually need to solve this problem, and once you figure that part out, then it becomes very easy to solve. This is a Venn diagram, right? So Venn diagrams, you can point out the little part. I actually know how Venn diagrams work. I'm not the Hillary campaign. I don't know if you saw that one. Like if they have like a fake Venn diagram that doesn't make any sense. Hit Twitter yesterday. So you can think about data in the sense of, well, I have some data, I would never need it, and I can't create it. So do I keep it? Do I archive it? Maybe there's a chance I need it at some point. But this data here, I have it, but I could also recreate it, and I currently don't need it. Now this data I would be tempted to save, because I can never recreate it. But the data that I can easily recreate, it really becomes a matter of how costly would it be for me to recreate it. On the other side of the spectrum, this is a very important one. Data I need, and I don't have it, and I cannot create it. And this data exists in every company. As Booking.com, we would really like to know something like share of mind. How often do people think of us? Now, we're not going to put probes in people's brains. We like data, but not that much, right? So there's no way we're ever going to get this. But we know this, right? We've drawn this thing, and we go, like, that's squarely in here, so let's think of proxies that we could actually get. But knowing that this data can never be created is important. Let me give you another example from Booking.com. This is a paper we published at the KDD conference. It's a knowledge data and discovery. It's a machine learning conference. And it's based on a tool called the Destination Finder, which is a very nice thing where if you don't know what destination you want to go to, but you like surfing and tapas, then it will tell you, you should probably go here. What we did here was we sent out this mailing where we looked at people's past reservations, and then we used this to infer what types of things they liked, and then we send them an email saying, our team of travel scientists, they wear white lab coats, have thought long and hard about your next holiday. Based on your past adventure, we think you have a passion for, and then we gave you some recommendations for things they might possibly like. Now, some people like this, other people thought we should all be fired. And I think the cool thing about this particular thing is that the data we use there, these things, they didn't exist 6 months prior. We actually actively went out and asked people, why did you go to this place in the first place? Right? Why did you take this vacation? And we did that with a purpose. We did that because we wanted to do things like this. So we actually went out and created the data before we could use it. No one ever asked about that part. People always ask, like, what model do you use? That's far less interesting. The way we collected this data is the key. And now, this is actually kind of interesting. So, Ben talked about the qualitative feedback, and we took this, and it looks like this key thing, right? People are really strongly reacting to the fact there are travel scientists involved. So, some people were also saying that this was creepy, They thought it was creepy, the notion that someone looked at their reservations. So the first email campaign using this data was very successful. Huge, bold numbers are significant. That's funny to do because they're all very significant. In science, it's sometimes an issue where only one of them is bold, and all of them are bold. So the first email campaign was just using the model and the design around it. And then I present this very often at machine learning conferences, and then they ask, what did you change about the model to double the impact the second time around, right? Because the second emailing, we doubled the impact. So what did we change? What model parameter did we choose? Did we use neural networks? Did we use reinforcement learning? No, we got rid of the travel scientists. We removed 2 words because people thought it was creepy. So we changed it to something like based on your past bookings. Nothing personal about that. Double the impact. Based on qualitative feedback from users. Super, super important when you're doing stuff like this. So here's how we collected this data. We basically asked them. This is fun. If you have no user like us, you can actually do this in a day. You get so much data. It's so good. Anyway, so the key point is that deciding what data you need is a very critical part of this process. And so don't just start running experiments going, well, I don't know, just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. That's not how this is supposed to work. You're supposed to figure out what you need to know and then run experiments that answer that question. That's what this is for. If you're just going to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, then your false positive rate is going to get after you. Because some experiments will look positive just by chance. There's no way around that. And for the developers in the room, you don't have to be a philosopher, right? And not everyone can come up with this crazy idea that the universe is a temple and that the light needs to be at the center or some shit like that. Some of us just built telescopes, and that's a very critical part of the process. It took 2,000 years for people to accept the idea that the sun was at the center, and even this was after 2 people independently suggested the idea. Okay, maybe the second one wasn't entirely independently, but at least he knew where he stole it from. If you ever do data science interviews, this one. So I don't know if there's any hiring manager in the room, but if you're hiring data scientists, then judge them by their questions, not by their answer. Because the questions they ask about how the data was collected, what data do you have? Can I collect more data? Can I get more points on this? How can we change this? Can we change the product in that way? Those are the key things that tell you that someone is thinking about this in the right way. That's all I have. So then, questions. That's all I have. Any? Yes.
The sauerkraut.
The sauerkraut, very good. Finally, jeez, that's why I put it in there. So so the British Navy had a very, very big problem that most of their sailors kept dying, and they had no idea why. So they would go on these very long sailing trips, and then one by one they started dying. And they had this idea that maybe it was caused by deficiency of something, and then one of the ideas was caused by deficiency of fresh fruit, but they couldn't really bring enough fresh fruit on a voyage like that, so they figured that maybe sauerkraut is the next best thing. So they brought 3 tons of sauerkraut and gave it to everyone every day, just to try to fend off the scurvy, and it didn't actually work. But it's a good example of well, we're going to Tahiti anyway.